Alright guys, so in today's notes we're going to talk about this thing called completing the square, and we're also just going to review graphing in vertex form. So the warm-up question here says, do you remember how to graph something like this? Y equals negative x plus 1 squared plus 2. So this was what we called earlier transformation form. Now we're going to call it vertex form, because within the parentheses here, and then this value at the end, remember this was x minus h plus k. So h and k actually build the vertex. So the vertex in this case would be negative 1 comma positive 2. So then we can go there. So we go to negative 1, positive 2, and we graph that 1 point. That's the vertex. From here, you could draw in your axis of symmetry. And then personally, what I would do is I would use my a value to figure out the rest of this problem. So a value is negative 1. So normally we'd go to the right one and up 1 and put a point here. But because the a value is negative 1, we multiply that up 1 by negative 1. So now we're going to go to the right one, down 1, to the left one, down 1. And then to find the next point, you would go to the right 2. And normally it would go up 4, because 2 squared is equal to 4. So instead of up 4, now we're going to go down 4. So we're going to go right 2, down 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to go left 2, down 1, 2, 3, 4. And then there is my 5 points. So now I can graph the quadratic. Okay. Again, if you don't understand the a value, what you're going to have to do is you're just going to have to say, well, I can plug in 0. 0 plus 1 squared plus 2. That's going to give me negative 1 squared plus 2. Gives you negative 1 plus 2, which is 1. Graph that point. Graph across the axis of symmetry. And then from here, you're going to have to plug in 1. So negative 1 plus 1 squared plus 2. So that's negative 2 squared plus 2. So it's negative 4 plus 2, which would give us negative 2. So 1, negative 2. Graph across the axis of symmetry. And there you go. You have your 5 points as well. So, 2 ways to graph in vertex form. I definitely recommend the a value. A value is quick and easy. Okay, but if you're struggling with the a value, always just plug in points. That's your next best bet if you're struggling with the a value. Alright, so the next one says solve the quadratic by factoring. Okay, so hopefully you remember how to do this one. So this is x squared negative 1. Well, actually, right, the only option here is 1 and 1. We would go positive and negative. Okay, so what's going to be the issue here, right? Positive 1, negative 1, x and x, right? We can't even make this problem happen because we can't get negative 8 in the middle. So this is actually a question where we can't even solve this. And that is why we're going to have to do completing the square. Okay, so we cannot solve with factoring here. So, questions 3 say, just factor the next two problems. What is special about them, right? So this is kind of review. We have perfect square in the back, perfect square in the front, and then 5 would be the square root of 25. 5 plus 5 gives us 10. So if you remember, this is x minus 5, x minus 5. So we would say this is x minus 5 squared. Remember, this is a perfect square trinomial. Same thing's going to happen here. Perfect square in the front, perfect square in the back. This is 3. This is 2. 2 times 3 gives you 6. 6 plus 6 is 12. So this is 2x plus 3 and 2x plus 3. So another perfect square trinomial, which would give us 2x plus 3 squared for our factors here. Okay, so perfect square trinomials are key when we're talking about completing the square. When we say we're completing the square, what we're building is perfect square trinomials. So, number 4, it says find the missing c value to create a perfect square trinomial. Then write it as a binomial squared. This process is called completing the square. So to find the missing c value to create the perfect square trinomial, we just need to think about, well, what if we take this, what plus itself gives us 12? Okay, so 6 plus 6 would give us 12. So that tells us that 6 squared would be what needs to go at the end here. Okay, so I know it says try more with your group and try to come up with a pattern, but in this case, we're just going to actually talk about what the pattern is, okay? So here we would do 3 and 3, right? That would make 6, so 3 squared would give us 9. For 14, that would be 7 and 7 would make 14, so that would be 49. And then negative 3, this is the hard one, okay? So to make negative 3, you would need 1.5 and 1.5, right? Well, what is 1.5? That's going to be 3 halves. So we're going to take 3 halves and we're going to square it, would give us 9 fourths is what needs to be at the end. Okay. Well, what do all of these things have in common? 7, 3 halves, and 3. If you look at the middle term, 6, 14, and 3, it's actually just the middle term divided by 2. And then what do we do at the end to that term? We square it and make it 49. So the pattern for completing the square is b over 2 squared. So we're going to take half of b, and then we're going to square it. So the notes for completing the square. This is kind of the long portion of this notes. The first thing that we're going to do when we're completing the square is that I like to put all of the terms on one side. So set the equation equal to 0. Okay? So that's what I like to do first. And then I'm just going to we'll just use 7a to actually go through this question. So 7a, we've already set it equal to 0. Okay, so we're good there. The next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to insert plus, minus behind the b value. Okay, so in a, I'm going to go x squared minus 8x. Then I'm going to say plus, minus, and then minus 1 is equal to 0. So notice I push the minus 1 backwards in the equation. I insert a plus, and I insert a minus. Okay, step 3 is where we're going to complete the square. So complete the square and fill in the blanks. So we created some blanks, now we're going to fill them in. So by completing the square, I'm talking about completing it with this b value right here. So we're going to take negative 8, we're going to divide it by 2, gives us negative 4. So then we're going to take negative 4 and we're going to square it. That's going to give us positive 16. So in the blanks, now I'm filling in these two blanks with positive 16. As you can see, what happens here is that we added 16 and we subtracted 16. Therefore, we did not change the equation at all, right? Because adding 16 and subtracting 16 would cancel each other out and just be 0. So we're not changing the equation at all when we're completing the square. But what we did do is we created a perfect square trinomial here. Remember, perfect square trinomials are something that we can factor. So this would factor down into x minus 4 and x minus 4. The negative 16 and the negative 1 are going to stay on the outside, and that's equal to 0. So then from here we can simplify x minus 4 and x minus 4. That's x minus 4 squared. Negative 16 minus 1 is negative 17. So our fourth step, we were kind of just continuing through. But the fourth step that we did after we filled in the blanks to complete the square was we factored the perfect square trinomial that we made. So the perfect square trinomial is getting factored. Okay. Step 5 is simplify anything that needs to be simplified. In this case, we simplified the x minus 4 and we simplified the negative 16 into negative 17. So that's the things that we simplified in step 5. And then step 6 is going to be solve for x. Okay, so solving for x. We have an equation set equal to 0, so we can add the 17 to the other side. It's going to give us x minus 4 squared is equal to 17. Now we're going to square root both sides. Run out of space here. Just shrink this down a little bit. Okay, so then we square root both sides. Now we have x minus 4 is equal to plus or minus 17. And then we're going to add the 4 to the other side. So we get x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of 17. And this would be our answer. Okay? So those are the steps of completing the square. Let's do it again. So step 1, set the equation equal to 0. Good, we're already there. Step 2, we insert the plus or minus behind the b value. So x squared plus 6x plus minus 8 is equal to 0. Now we need to actually complete the square. So we take 6, we cut it in half, that gives us 3. We take 3 and we square it, that gives us 9. So to complete the square, we're filling in 9s. Now we've built our perfect square trinomial. So that's going to factor down into x plus 3 times x plus 3. Notice the 3 that we found when we took b divided by 2 is actually the 3 we're filling in to the 2 factors. Okay, we could take negative 9 and negative 8 and simplify that down to negative 17. And now we have x plus 3 squared minus 17 is equal to 0. After our factoring and simplifying, and now we're just solving for x. So add 17 to both sides. You get x plus 3 squared is equal to 17. Square root both sides. You get x plus 3 is equal to plus or minus square root of 17. And then you just subtract the 3. So you get x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 17. All right, let's do another one. So, first things first, we set the equation equal to 0, so that means you're subtracting 3 from both sides. So that's x squared plus 5x minus 3 is equal to 0. Now we're inserting that plus or minus behind the b value. So x squared plus 5x plus minus 3 is equal to 0. After this, we take the completing the square path, so we do 5 divided by 2, which I like to keep it as 5 halves if we ever have to deal with fractions. And then we're going to take 5 halves and we're going to square it, which would give us 25 fourths. So in these two blanks, we're filling in with 25 fourths and 25 fourths. So where do we go from here? We factor the perfect square trinomial. So that's going to be x plus 5 halves times x plus 5 halves. And then we can simplify this section right here. I'm going to go negative 25 fourths. And then 3, we need to get it into fourths. So we're going to take 3 times 4 fourths, which would give us 12 fourths. So that's negative 12 fourths. And that's still equal to 0. Continuing the simplifying process, we would say x plus 5 halves squared minus 37 fourths is equal to 0. Okay. Finally, from here, we're solving for x, so we would add the 37 fourths to the other side. And then we get x plus 5 halves squared is equal to 37 fourths. Square root both sides. Move up here. We would get x plus 5 halves is equal to plus or minus the square root of 37. Square root of 4 on the bottom would just become 2. And then the last thing we need to do is subtract the 5 halves from both sides. So x is equal to negative 5 halves plus or minus square root 37 over 2. and this would be our answer. Okay, so where that 2 came from in the bottom, right here we had a radical 4, so that radical 4 then just became 2. All right, let's do one more together. So this last one looks a little bit different, right? We have an a value, but notice 5 comes out of all of those things. So what we can really do is we can factor out the 5. Gives us x squared minus 3x plus 6 equals 0. And then we can just divide off the 5. Now we don't have to worry about it. So we have x squared minus 3x plus 6 is equal to 0. Now we have a quadratic set equal to 0 where the a value is 1. So now we can do our completing the square process. So first we expand the formula by putting a plus and a minus in there. Second, we complete the square. So we take negative 3, we cut it in half. And then we're going to square that value. So it's 9/4. So 9/4 is going into each of these things. Now we have our perfect square trinomial. So that's x minus 3/2 times x minus 3/2. On the outside, we have negative 9/4 plus 6. And then we need to do some simplifying. So x minus 3/2 squared. Negative 9/4 plus 6. So this could be really written as 4 times 6 is 24/4. So it's going to be positive 15/4 is equal to 0. Subtract 15/4 from both sides. You get x minus 3/2 squared is equal to negative 15/4. And now we need to square root both sides because we're solving for x. So x equals plus or minus. Remember, square root 4 is going to be a 2 in the bottom. Square root of negative 15. So this is I radical 15. So we're pulling that negative out of there, calling it I. Whoops, this is not just x, right? This is x minus 3/2. So then the very last step here, guys, we're going to add 3/2 to both sides. So we get a final solution of x equals 3/2 plus or minus I radical 15 over 2. And then this would be our final answer. Okay, so completing the square, maybe not the easiest thing, but it's a memorized thing. You just have to memorize the steps for when it comes to completing the square. And the more you practice things, the easier they are to memorize. So make sure you're trying these homework problems out that are a bunch of completing the square problems. And if you ever struggle on the method, come back to these notes, right? It shows you the step-by-step how to do this. All right. So, number 8. Remember vertex form, y equals a times x minus h squared plus k? Now that we've learned how to complete the square, you can actually change a quadratic from standard form to vertex form. So the reason I like to set my equations equal to 0 is because of this, changing from standard to vertex form. So we're going to treat this y as if it's 0, and we're going to say y is equal to x squared minus 8x. Because it's already set equal to 0, we do our plus, our minus, and then minus 11. And then we're going to complete the square. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Negative 4 squared is 16. So 16 gets filled in. Now we have our perfect square trinomial. So that's x minus 4 times x minus 4 if we factor that. Negative 16 minus 11 is negative 27. So then now we have y is equal to x minus 4 squared minus 27. And then bam, we're now in vertex form. Okay, so now we can change from standard form to vertex form, which in my opinion is pretty neat. So that is completing the square. As always, guys, if you have questions, message me on Canvas or through email, or just bring your questions tomorrow to class. Okay, hope you guys have a great rest of your day.